Here in Times Square in the city of New York, under a state of emergency, a lone police car sitting between two city blocks. Well, good evening once again. Day 1168 of the Trump administration, leaving us 216 days to go until the presidential election. And we'll start this way. Perhaps it is not said often enough. The last role Donald Trump inhabited before becoming our president was host of a reality show produced and aired by the entertainment division of our parent network over 14 seasons. As a television, ever talking about casting, specifically central casting, which he repeated as recently as this afternoon. People tuning in to today's White House coronavirus briefing would be forgiven for thinking that Trump, acting as casting director, had assembled on either side of him, social distancing notwithstanding, all the most serious-looking people he could find in the federal government. Would be forgiven for thinking that Trump, acting as casting director, had assembled on either side of him, social distancing notwithstanding, all the most serious-looking people he could find in the federal government. The Attorney General, actual generals, an admiral, the defense secretary, and out of nowhere they briefed the public today about drug interdiction, including false stats on the border wall, and the situation in Iran. The president said all we've gotten from the Middle East is death. He went on to give a brief lesson in the 1917 flu pandemic, which was in 1918, and took a swing at John Kerry along the way. And then this happened.
Did you know I was number one on Facebook? And I just found out I'm number one on Facebook. I thought that was very nice.
Later, on the actual subject of coronavirus, the president said, as he does every day in some form, nobody's ever seen anything like this. He went on to confirm the White House is considering restricting air and rail travel in this country. He said he'd be perfectly willing to talk to Joe Biden by phone about the fight against the virus. This was another record day in our country. Just today, more than 25,000 new cases, approaching 1,000 new deaths in the space of one day. And so tonight, the United States now has over 211,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus, over 4,700 deaths. Also, as of today, more than 280 million Americans are living under some form of stay-at-home order, since we have no idea how many people have the virus itself. After Tuesday's dire prediction that as many as 240,000 American lives could be lost to the coronavirus, the vice president, offered this disturbing analogy today.
They call it modeling, Wolf, where they look at what's happened around the world. We think Italy may be the most comparable area to the United States at this point.
According to the latest estimates, Italy, which is of course a much smaller country, has seen over 13,000 coronavirus deaths thus far. Here in the United States, New York City remains the epicenter of the outbreak with over 47,000 confirmed cases. Another 278 deaths were reported in New York City over just the past 24 hours, bringing the total, again, in the city alone to 1,374. And Governor Andrew Cuomo warns there are still several dark weeks ahead.
What we're looking at now is the apex, top of the curve, roughly at the end of April, which means another month of this.
It was another rough day for the financial markets. The Dow closed down more than 900 points on fears the economy could be shut down longer than people first expected. Tomorrow we get to see initial unemployment claims from last week. CNBC reporting economists have been ramping up their projections. Quote, they range to as high as 9 million, but many are between 4 million to 5 million. That follows the record 3.3 million claims filed the week earlier. But again today, the president was sounding optimistic.
Now, I do think once we get rid of the virus, I think we're going to have a boom economy. I think it's going to go up rather quickly, maybe very quickly, and maybe slowly, but it's going to go up, and it'll all come back. And I think it's actually going to come back stronger than what it was because of the stimulus.
With an estimated 80% of us living under some sort of stay-at-home order today, Florida finally came along. After weeks of resistance and criticism, and while presiding over a huge population of seniors, Governor DeSantis issued the order.
The president just the other day announced they're going to do a 30-day extension for the current guidelines. And although the guidelines don't call for any new actions beyond what was there previously, in Florida we did the 15 days to stop the spread. I mean, I think it's clear that that represents effectively a national pause.
We also found out today the Trump administration has decided against reopening Obamacare marketplaces to new customers, despite the pandemic, despite the need for available health care. The president was asked about that today and quickly handed the question over to his vice president.
They took that up under the task force, and maybe, Mike, you want to say a few words about it?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And what I can tell you is that the president has made a priority from the outset of our task force work to make sure every American knows that they can have a coronavirus and they don't have to worry about the cost.
That's about as detailed as the answer got. Meanwhile, there's new uncertainty tonight over a new wave of emergency relief for struggling Americans in the midst of all this. Robert Costa of the Washington Post, who joins us in just a moment, has this exclusive reporting. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is telling House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to stand down. And Congress is already talking about an investigation of how the U.S. got its response to this pandemic so wrong, so behind the eight ball. NBC News has learned there are informal discussions underway about the creation of a 9/11 style commission to look into what happened, to come up with a plan to handle any future pandemics. Here's how the president addressed the country's preparedness during this evening's coronavirus briefing.
We're building thousands of ventilators right now. Now, it takes a period of time to build them. And again, nobody could have known a thing like this could happen. We're building thousands. We will fairly soon be at a point where we have far more than we can use, even after we stockpile for some future catastrophe, which we hope doesn't happen.
To put the current crisis in perspective, more Americans have already died from coronavirus than were killed on 9/11. Peter Baker of the New York Times, who also joins us in a moment, writes today, quote, "Under the best case scenario, Mr. Trump will see more Americans die than Presidents Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard M. Nixon saw die in the Korean and Vietnam Wars combined. The lowest estimate would claim nearly as many Americans as World War I under President Woodrow Wilson, and 14 times as many Americans as Iraq and Afghanistan together under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. To all of that, here's how New York's governor is advising Americans to look toward the future.
We're never going to be the same again. We're not going to forget what happened here. The fear that we have, the anxiety that we have, that's not just going to go away. When do we get back to normal? I don't think we get back to normal. I think we get back, or we get to a new normal.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.